When we come into the world, we are confronted by sounds, sensations, different kinds of temperatures, and we start to form relationships with our caregivers. And as we are fed, as we sleep, as we start to learn to walk, we start to form very proto versions of prediction and we start to have expectations about what's going to happen. Then these become more and more sophisticated, and then they become what we might call hopes, what we might call wishes. And all of these elements form what in psychoanalysis are called unconscious fantasies. Now, I think this term is quite helpful because it encapsulates quite a broad range of different experiences that make up our mental lives or our inner worlds, as you might like to call it. Now, when you bring trauma into the equation, relational or developmental trauma, then this can really have a distorting effect on our unconscious fantasies. And our hopes and wishes might become quite different from somebody's who hasn't experienced relational trauma. So, if you like, where we think things might become predictable, they become unpredictable. Where there is supposed to be presence, there's absence, and vice versa. Our sense of the world becomes quite wary and quite confused, and it feels quite, in a way, quite weird. And the word weird indicates a lack of belonging. We feel that we don't belong. And if we experience relational trauma, we may, obviously, when we're infants, we don't have any reasoning capacity beyond beyond thinking that there must be something about me, there must be something wrong with me that makes me bad or makes me wrong. And obviously, wrong or bad at the very early stages of life, these are proto versions of these concepts, but we start to symbolize in a very rudimentary way our experiences to try to make sense of it. And a part of that process is to form these very early symbolic versions of feeling wrong or bad, because as humans we need to make sense of things. So as we expect things to happen, as we hope or wish things to happen, if we experience relational trauma, then we become very preoccupied with fate, a version of fate anyway, and what's going to happen next. If somebody doesn't experience trauma and they live in a relatively, because nobody can live in a completely predictable environment, obviously, but if we live in an environment where there are failures, where we feel let down, there are ruptures, if you like, where these are repaired each time, then we can feel safer in the world because we know that somebody is attending to us. But if we live in a chaotic or unpredictable environment, we start to feel that we don't feel safe, and we're always looking for signs and indications of what we can do to make ourselves feel safer. And we become very, very attuned or aware of what our caregivers are doing and what's happening in the environment, we become extremely sensitive. And we form this very, very sort of advanced level of intuition. But the problem is that this kind of intuition, because of course intuition can be very helpful, and I'll talk about that more later on. But this kind of intuition is very much about being safe and being aware of or trying to work out what's happening in the mind of our caregivers. What is it that they're thinking? What is it that they're feeling? And so this kind of intuition is very, very advanced in a way because we're so preoccupied. But this leads to quite a paranoid way of being in the world. So all of these elements then make up the sense of the primary curse, and we can see how this makes us feel that we don't belong. So if you think about the word weird, WEIRD, as I said, that's about feeling that you don't belong in the world. Interestingly, the etymology of that word comes from the Old English or the Germanic root, which is WYRD, which is connected with fate. So between the weirdness, the lack of belonging, and this fate, that's where I think the feeling of the curse position is, because we feel bad, we feel wrong, we feel weird, but we're also, because of that, we're always preoccupied by the future. We can't live in the present. And what I mean is that we can't live in the present because we're always very, very concerned about what's going on, and what's going to happen. So, as I say in the book, past events become future omens. So there is no present in a way. So that's the primary curse. Now, the secondary curse is our attempt to symbolize these experiences, to give them a name, if you like. Now, Freud talked about, I don't know whether actually Freud ever used this expression for the unconscious, but anyway, the cauldron, this bubbling cauldron, is always associated with the Freudian repressed unconscious. But I'd like to extend that metaphor a little bit today to stay with this idea of the curse, and it's appropriate to think about it then as a witch's cauldron, which represents all of the unconscious fantasies which are bubbling up and are distorting the way that we see reality. And because if somebody has experienced relational trauma and that they have this relationship to the prophecy of what's going to happen, of fate, of the curse, then they will be trying to they won't be trying consciously, but unconsciously they will be recreating situations which make them feel, yes, once again, here's the curse. I am a person who is bad, I'm a person who's wrong, and therefore here we are again, I'm in a relationship which isn't working out, or I've had another experience, perhaps here I am, I've had another accident, which proves that I'm somebody who's particularly targeted by fate. Now, but what's important here is that because of the trauma and the absence of predictability in one's life, the attachment figure, instead of a human being, it becomes a curse. So because there's certainty and there's predictability about the curse of having these misfortunate experiences, or unfortunate experiences, sorry. And we can also romanticize ourselves as a cursed person. You find this with many poets, artists, musicians who have created the most wonderful and beautiful work, but they have been also very, very self-destructive at the same time, because in a way, although they've created this beautiful art, which we can be very thankful for, they've also suffered a great deal because they have very much identified with this prophecy or with this curse. So the secondary curse, as I say, is a way to try to make sense of something, to make something certain, to try to put a lid on this cauldron, but which of course you can't put a lid on it until you can find a way to think about what might be in there and to make links between what happened to you when you were a child and what you're doing now. Is there any similarity between the people that you're choosing in your relationships now and the kind of parenting that you experienced when you were a child? Now, this isn't about blaming people's parents or the caregivers, because people's caregivers do the best that they could given with what they were given. So that's not the idea here, but the idea is to think about simply about what happened when you were a child, what might have happened, and how do you feel about what happened, and then map that to what you're doing now and the kind of relationships and experiences that you're having now. And if this video seems to speak to you and you feel that you have particular bad luck, you may think that you're the odd one out in the family who is kind of targeted, then perhaps it may be useful to think about how those early experiences are repeating in the present. And I'd like to then say something more about intuition, because as I said earlier, the intuition of the primary curse is very much about being fixated with what one's caregivers are doing and becoming very attuned to it. The psychoanalyst Shandor Ferenczi said that people such as this become clairvoyant. So we can see there a connection again with between the trauma of early life and then this almost supernatural capacity to be attuned to what others are thinking and feeling. So there we have this idea of the empath, particularly is a modern day example of this, or highly sensitive person. But that is where, if you like, I would say that's where the intuition is going to waste, because if we can combine our instinctive gut feelings with our thinking capacity, then we can actually use this elevated or sophisticated form of intuition to help us to think about where we might do something differently, where there might be another creative way of doing something that might release us and soften our attachment to the cursed position.